this is a hard sweep, and this is also what I like to call, in potter terms, a big no-no. Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? Today we're going to talk about the next step in building our brand new studio garage. In the last episode of this installment, we ended up doing our walls. And our walls look really nice actually. They're nice and white and they reflect plenty of light in this studio. Very easy for us to see after this and very good for us to work on our stuff. But now we have to prepare for the next step, which is where we're going to put our wheel and where we're going to put our kiln. Now for many of you out there, if you're a little bit like me, you're probably treating this just like you were going to treat it as if your brand new baby was going to come home and you're trying to set up a nursery real nice and neat for it. You've painted the walls, you've gotten all your little toys right in order, everything is safe so that nothing can happen to the baby, you have a spot right back here for your crib. Everything is gonna be good. And after you get that brand new, beautiful, bouncing baby kiln in here, you're gonna stare at it every single night and check to see if it's really, really okay every single time you come in the studio until you get comfortable enough with it to realize that it'll be fine. But before we actually put our wheel and our kiln in the studio, there are a couple of safety precautions that you're probably not gonna read when you buy the kiln. There are some major things that'll help you in the studio as far as the placement of your wheel and your kiln go. And I've been lucky enough to kind of figure them out over time. And I've also been fairly lucky enough to have a lot of potter friends who go, do this, it's better for ventilation. Do this, it's better for your studio. When I first got my kiln and my wheel, I was just excited to have it in the studio. I didn't really care where I put it. And I feel like that's a lot of people's first experiences with their wheels and their kilns. They're just excited to get to work really quickly. But in this video, we're gonna talk about where you can put your kiln and your wheel to best optimize your work. Not only that, your placement of your kiln and your wheel are actually really important for the safety of yourself inside of your own studio. Now, as usual, I'm gonna put a timestamp right up here for anyone who wants to skip straight forward to the kiln portion of this video, because the kiln is the main focus of this video. Although in a couple of minutes, we are going to talk about the wheel. The wheel is one of those things that you don't really think about where to put until you put it at such a space for a very long time, and one day you move it and think to yourself,
"God, this space is way better."
And that's kind of the same experience that I went through when I first got my wheel. I just kind of figured my wheel plugs into an outlet. That means it must go anywhere next to an outlet. But you notice I have an outlet right here, although my wheel is not right here. That's because I find it extremely unwise to put your wheel directly in front of an outlet. And today, that's what we're gonna go over. But first, I should probably go and get my kiln. There's really no use to making a video about where to put your wheel in your kiln if I don't really have my kiln here yet. So, do you guys remember last time when I snapped my fingers and I let you guys know it's technically the same day? I turned the camera off, I painted the wall real quick, let it dry for a couple hours, turned the camera back on, and that video was pretty much done in one day. Quick potter tip, this was not done in one day. As it turns out, something that I didn't know, even if you order a kiln straight from the company, it takes them like 2 or 3 weeks to make it. They don't just have a warehouse full of a bunch of kilns that are just ready to be shipped out. And then it also takes a lot of time for them to deliver it to you. So this is like 3 weeks later. There's a couple of things that you're absolutely gonna want or wonder where you should put in this day and age. Number one, let's not lie to each other, you're gonna bring your computer into the studio. Sooner or later, while you're throwing, you're gonna wanna bring your iPod in the studio, your Android, your computer. You're gonna wanna bring some type of electronic equipment into your studio because you wanna be entertained while you throw, or you wanna kinda zone out while you throw. And you know what? I don't blame you. Because of that, there's 2 main rules you really need to follow as far as where to put your wheel. And I figure I'd address this first because this is a really important step. Sooner or later, you're gonna be running extension cords all throughout your garage.
I need to plug in my computer now, so I'm just gonna string this extension cord all the way across the garage.
Just because you don't know where to put your stuff and there's gonna be cords everywhere. And because of that, we're gonna be talking about tip number 1. Whether you are having someone come into your garage and plant electrical outlets in your garage, or you already have them placed in your garage, you do not, and I repeat, you do not want to put your wheel directly in front or at level of your actual outlets in your socket. Some of you have probably already noticed, but my wheel is actually around the corner from my outlet. My outlet is right here. All my plugs and everything are plugged in right here. Why wouldn't I just put that directly here? Well, I wouldn't put my wheel where I throw with wet water especially with the outlet being at level to my wheel pretty much directly in front of that outlet. As it turns out, and I'm told by top scientists, that this electrical outlet here has electricity in it. I know, it's a little bit shocking to hear. But for the same reasons that I probably wouldn't try to make toast while I'm taking a bath, I'm not gonna put my electrical components directly next to or at level of my wheel, especially when I'm throwing with lots of water. So the first tip that I can give you when placing your wheel is never have your wheel directly in front of your outlets. Either have them around the corner from your outlets or have your outlets placed a little bit above your wheel. My second tip kind of goes along with my first tip. While I did just tell you that you want to keep a safe distance away from any electrical components from your wheel because number one, there's dust and silica, and number two, which should be number one to be honest with you, is that you're going to be throwing with water. And because of that, the previous rule pretty much stems down to don't have electricity near your wheel. But let's be real with each other. You're gonna have your computer, you're gonna have your phone. If you're really fancy, you might just have a TV next to your wheel, and most of the time you guys wanna be looking directly ahead. You know, cause you're on your wheel like this, and you can just look up while you don't have to crank your, you know. In relation to that, is if you are going to have electrical components, your computer, your phone, anything around your wheel, it kind of stems back to the last tip. If you're gonna have anything electrical around your wheel, don't have them at level, and this especially includes your computer, have them at least a couple of feet above your wheel. This tip also helps when you're kind of looking for shelves or some type of nightstand to comfortably put things next to your wheel as you're throwing. For example, I went to a power plant and they gave me some of these spindles here, which usually electric companies wrap wire around. If I stack two of them on top of each other, I can very easily put my computer up here, and while I'm throwing, I can look to the side every once in a while, listen to music, but be rest assured that my computer is above my wheel. I feel like this one's a little bit common sense, but clearly you should keep all your electrical components and your phone above your wheel and not directly at level or with it right here. All the dust and silica is gonna go directly from my wheel and it might fly off into my computer. So tip number two, if you're gonna get a nightstand or if you're gonna get some type of dresser or if you're gonna get something next to your wheel, as most people do after a while, to comfortably put items on while they're throwing, make sure it's a little bit above your wheel. I mean, many of you are probably thinking you just need a spot for your tools, but you're gonna put stuff on there that shouldn't have dust in it. Why are we lying to each other? Why don't you just click that like button and be honest with me? Tip number three, and this is technically not a tip that I follow, but a large majority of the potters that I know who have their own studio or their own workspace follow this rule. A lot of potters actually put a mirror right in front of their wheel. Doing this allows you to see all angles at all times, and it really helps you concentrate on your posture while you're throwing. I personally don't do this, and I've never done this because I've always been taught to get up and look at your piece and spin it around a little bit. But for those of you who are working on your posture, or you just really like to see your pot all the way around, a lot of potters actually put a mirror right in front of their wheels. This allows you to do two things, especially if you're a beginner potter. Number one, it allows you to see your own posture. Your posture and your form is incredibly important when you're throwing, and it's really difficult to sit down, record, it's not really difficult for me, it's kind of my job, but it's really difficult to sit down, record yourself on a camera, get a good quality camera, dry your hands off, look at the footage, go back. You don't need to do all that. You could very easily, if you want to look at your own form and your posture to help improve your throwing skills, or maybe the form of when you're throwing to help save a little bit of back pain in the future, you could just put a mirror directly in front of your wheel so you can see how you look when you're throwing. This tip honestly sounds a little bit strange, but it's kind of like going to the gym for the first or second time. You start going to the gym and then you start learning that your form is important in what you're doing physically. Sooner or later, you start looking in the mirror all the time to make sure that your form is correct. And after that, your musculature starts to build a lot more. You start to get isolation. You start to get a little bit better at what you're doing because you can see yourself doing it. And the same rule applies with putting a mirror in front of your wheel. Gotta keep those elbows in. My form good, bro? Bro, my form good? This one's not really a tip on where to put your kiln and your wheel, but this one really needs to be put in there for people who are new and still building their studio. Never, ever, ever hard sweep inside of your studio. Some people say to never sweep at all inside of your studio, but I think a light sweep is very necessary every once in a while. The reason for it is that you're working in a space where you're gonna have tons of dust and silica and dirt inside of your studio all the time. And not only is it harmful to your work, it's also really harmful to your lungs. I'm serious. A long time ago we called it potter's rot, but now we just call it silicosis. Once clay gets inside your lungs, it will not come out. There is no procedure to make it come out. It is extremely deadly. And before you ask, yes, there is a major difference in between hard sweeping and soft sweeping, or what I like to call vicious sweeping and regular sweeping. You should never ever hard or viciously sweep inside of your studio for the reasons that I just named. Dust being everywhere, silica getting inside your lungs, for your own health, and for the health of your ceramic artwork. Let me clarify it for you with an example real quick. This is a hard sweep, and this is also what I like to call, in potter terms, a big no-no. Get this dirt out of my studio. I don't need it in here. I want it flung out of the door. But this is a normal or soft sweep, and this is fine inside of your studio. This in the potter world is what I like to call a little yes yes. Some people actually say it's never okay to sweep inside of your studio for those two reasons. But I find that as long as you don't sweep like a madman inside of your studio and fling dust and silica everywhere and get it in your lungs, and you're in on the pottery and on the cat and on the dog and on your ex-husband, and as long as you never hard sweep like that, you should be fine. But in the interest of furthering that point, I highly suggest you get yourself a mop and a mop bucket. And I also suggest you at least take a good 10 to 20 minutes once a week mopping down your studio floor. Look, it's almost unavoidable. You're gonna get dust and silica everywhere, including on your floor, because dust is heavier than air evidently. And if you end up never sweeping or mopping your studio, you're gonna get a layer of filth on everything. Just a little bit of cleaning a week could help get rid of all of that, and it won't affect your lungs or your pottery as much. So I heavily suggest you mop for maybe 10-20 minutes at least once a week, a little bit of time put aside right before you clean up and go to work, or whatever you're gonna do after you're done throwing. I know that one was an extra long point, but I'm very serious. 10 to 20 minutes per week of just mopping the floor of your studio could save your lungs and your artwork. You see this? This is my serious face. It's also my ugly face, but I was born with the second one. My serious face I chose to have on. The final tip I can give you is almost a non-point, because it really depends on your house. You see, the house that I'm in right now technically faces like the southwest, and because of that, the sun rises over there in the east, right? So the sun comes up over there and it sets over there. It rises in the east and sets in the west. I'm not doing yoga, this is how the sun goes. That's my sun salutation. Also note that my wheel is right over there, which means in the morning, unless I have light inside my studio, if I want a closed studio and I don't want to open the doors or anything, I'm pretty much still gonna have a dark room even in the morning. There's no light penetrating this fortress of solitude while the sun rises. But you see those rays of sunlight right there? That tells you it's later in the day for me. The sun is right behind my camera, right over there setting, which means I'm getting direct light into my studio from my garage in the evening. This one's a little bit of a meticulous point, but if you do want good lighting sometime in the day, you should really plan for that. Let's say your studio is facing the east and the sun rises in the east. Well, we don't have to say the sun rises in the east because it does. But if you have a window that's facing the east and then your wheel is facing the east and you open the window in the morning, say you get up in the morning and want to throw, well, you're gonna get beamed in the face by the sun at like 10 a.m. As I said, that one's a little bit of a minuscule point, but it kind of matters a little bit, especially if you want either good lighting or you don't want the sun directly in your face. You should think about the positioning of your studio and when the sun and the elements are gonna beam you in the eyeballs at 8 a.m. in the morning. Look, I'm gonna keep it stacked with you. I don't even like the sun beaming me in the face when I'm asleep and halfway unconscious. Do you really think I want it when I'm working on my artwork? The first thing I have to tell you about where to put your kiln really isn't a tip or trick, but it's more of heavy potter's law. Even in the instruction manual of your brand new kiln, if it did come with an instruction manual, some of you might have bought your kiln secondhand, it will state that you should have your kiln 18 inches to 2 feet away from anything burnable. I mean this with all of my little potter heart. It is the sole reason that I decided to go to IKEA and Home Depot and pick out shelves that are made of mostly metal, because I can put them much closer to my kiln without worrying about catching them on fire. But trust and believe, only a fool would put a giant piece of equipment that can reach over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit next to either the walls of their house or something burnable within their studio and risk that type of thing. It is almost potter's law that you have a sufficient amount of space, at least 18 inches, away from anything burnable. It is a large reason why I like to have metal shelves for holding my pottery. I don't really have to worry about that distance. That very hard, set in stone potter rule should be followed by everyone who has a kiln in their own home or even in an industrial or store setting. That being said, I don't know a single potter who actually follows that rule. Just listen to me. I know a lot of other ceramic artists, and I know a lot of other potters, and I know there's a lot of you scoffing in the comments below right now. But literally no one that I know follows that rule. Although it's said on the Digital Fire website, although it's said when you buy your kiln on any website that you buy it from, the person you buy the kiln from will probably tell you that, and the instruction manual says that. This should be 18 inches at least away from anything burnable in your house, including your house,
because your house is burnable.
I am technically following that rule right now. If you look behind my kiln, there's at least enough space, including 18 inches, to walk behind my kiln, and there's enough space back here, although you might not be able to see it with the depth perception of the camera. This wooden shelf right here is at least 2 feet away, and there's a trunk down there that's completely made of metal. Everything around my kiln is at least 18 inches away from it. It is Potter's Law that I tell you that one thing, although almost no one follows that rule. And I'm only telling you this because I care about you, because I love you, especially if you already clicked the like button. And that one's not really a tip, but I just figured we would get it out of the way because it is technically a safety regulation that all potters should, if they don't follow it, at least know about. Tip number 2, I have the great pleasure of having to pay someone to hook up the correct amount of ampage to my house in order to take this big kiln here. Every kiln takes a certain amount of amps. For example, the max that this kiln takes, which is my 1027 Scut, actually takes about 60 amps. But before you buy your kiln, tip number 2 includes checking how many amps your house can actually give out of your breaker box. Here's what you do. You go over to that box on the side of your house, usually somewhere in your backyard or at least on the side of your front yard or house, and then you open that up. Somewhere on that, it'll say how many amps that box can give. Newer ones usually give about 200, but mine is a bit of an older one. It gives about 100. But of course, your house already has things hooked up to it. For example, my toaster takes like 6 amps, my washer and dryer take about 30 to 40 amps each, and if my house is only a 100 amp house, well, I can't run something that's 60 amps and my washer and my dryer. That's well over 100 amps. The breakers in my house are gonna freak out and all the electricity is probably just gonna shut off and I'm gonna short out my house. So tip number 2 includes making sure that you have the proper voltage and amps for your house to be able to handle what you wanna put inside of your house. There are a bunch of different kilns out there and a bunch of different sizes. For example, my old Scut 181 Ghost took like a max of 30 amps, so it was no problem to plug directly into my house. And as long as I wasn't running the washer, dryer, the microwave, the toaster, and everything at the same time, and all the lights in the house, I was essentially fine. But before you buy your kiln, make sure you know how many amps it takes from your house, and make sure that your house can handle that type of power. It's gonna be a very sad day when you saved up about 4 G's to buy one of these babies, and then you figure out, I don't have enough power to hook up. And then you've essentially spent 4 more grand having someone come over, hook it up. You might call the electric plant that runs the power inside of your house or inside of your city to come over and make improvements to your box so it can go from 100 to 200 or 200 to 300. You don't want to do all that. I'm sure most people would rather just have a smaller kiln that takes less amps than to get a giant kiln and spend almost double the money on the kiln improving their house to take that much power. Tip number 3, and this kind of goes along with tip number 2. As I said before, I had to wire this house up. It's not like I have a 60 amp plug in my house somewhere just laying around where I can plug my kiln into. I had to actually have somebody come over and pay them a lot of money to come over and put a 60 amp outlet inside of my house. It's actually right behind my kiln right here. But because of this, I specifically requested that they put it as close as they can to my garage door. You most likely can't see it, but it runs all the way up there and goes straight into some conduit, and the conduit comes right down here, which is as close as he could get to my door right here. I specifically requested him put it this close to the door because this honestly helps a lot with the venting. Number 1, if I ever want to run a vent from the bottom of my kiln directly outside, I can do that with ease. Many people opt out for getting a vent for their kilns, and because heat rises, they will either put it directly above their kiln when they vent it or open it up after a glaze firing, or they'll get the big tube and put it at the bottom of their kiln and direct that tube directly outside. They would much rather just have a big hose connected to the outside, kind of like a dryer system, and they would rather the heat just go straight out the door. And that's it. Enough said, you don't really have to worry about the heat anymore. This ventilation system comes in a couple different forms, which we're not going over today. But there's pretty much the one that goes above your kiln because heat rises and it just takes it straight out, or it goes below your kiln and you never have to open your kiln. You wait till it fully cools down and the hose just goes outside. The reason why I put my kiln directly next to the opening of my garage or my built-in studio is because I want all the air and all the heat to go directly out. And that's about it. I have some other tips for your kiln and where it would go, and some things that you can use to optimize your kiln, your loadout, but there's some things that I want to save for later. Number one, this video is probably getting a little bit long. And number two, if you just got your kiln, I want to get you set up in this way first, before I get you set up in other ways. The placement of your kiln is actually really important as far as safety goes in your own home with a giant piece of equipment that gets over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And the placement of your wheel is more for comfort's sake. No one's really gonna die if you put a little bit of mud inside your computer, except for all of your work that you've ever saved on your computer because you never back up your files, even though the computer tells you to every day. But thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I really hope that some of these tips and tricks helped you. I know a lot of you guys already have your stuff set in your studio, and now you're probably like, oh, I wish I would have thought of that beforehand. Now I don't want to move my wheel. But these are just some of the things that I've learned over time from having my own wheel and my own kilns and my own studio and my own space. There's some things that you need to pay attention to as far as your equipment goes, and then there are some things that really just make it extra comfortable for you to be inside of your studio. For example, if you have someone coming over to your studio and they're gonna build outlets inside of your studio, other than your wall outlet for your kiln, then you should probably have those outlets be a little bit higher than your workstations, because you don't want clay and muck in there. And that's a really important one that a lot of people don't actually think about. Imagine working on your wheel and having your computer directly beside your wheel. That computer now has a half-life. But thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. If you'd like to see any of my actual artwork, the links are always down below for your beautiful potter eyes to see. We have a really good Discord community full of a bunch of other potters who are not only fans of the channel, but really good ceramic artists, believe it or not. Some of them can blow me out of the water. We also have a fantastic Facebook community if you want to go there and keep up with all the updates on Earth Nation. I love your Dirty Potter faces, and I will see you guys next week. Good luck with all your brand new studio stuff. If you are actually watching this for some tips to build your studio and you're actually going through the process, much like I am for rebuilding your studio. I will see you guys later. Also, those same people are still drinking diet soda, regular soda, mountains of sugar, which is pretty much just cocaine for children, eating hamburgers, which is the meat of dead animals, and smoking all day long, and then they worry about the little bit of chemicals that come out of here.